Good morning once again. I'm glad I don't have to talk about post-2015. Once again, my name is Mabel Sengendo. I work with Sonke Gender Justice, and I think you've seen quite a lot of Sonke all over the place. We're painting this place. Sonke is a South African-based NGO that works to promote gender equality, prevent HIV, and gender-based violence. Basically, I coordinate a UN Trust Fund project entitled Engaging Men and Boys in the Implementation of Gender-Based Violence Laws and Policies in the Prevention of HIV and Gender-Based Violence. And these are only 3 countries for now. That's Sierra Leone, Rwanda, and Kenya. So how Sonke works, because it's a South African-based NGO, we work through partners. For those who don't know, we are the chair of Men Engage Africa, and we do the funding on behalf of our Men Engage partners in Africa. The African region has 17 countries right now, and so the 3 that I've mentioned are part of those. So I'll just explain how we're doing policy advocacy in the region, in those countries. The first thing we did with this project was to carry out a policy scan in the 3 countries to find out what laws are existing in those countries and what are the gaps, and recommend what we can do to improve those laws and policies. If you look at Rwanda, I think Rwanda of the 3 scored highly, and I think we've all seen the policy environment in Rwanda in terms of how they've worked so hard to improve their laws on gender-based violence prevention. So the biggest issue for them was that there was no language involving men and boys, and that's part of what this project then was helping to support, for us to advocate to include language around engaging men and boys in the prevention of gender-based violence and the prevention of HIV and AIDS. The first thing we did is set our priorities. What do we want to improve? What do we want to look at? The last 3 years, Rwanda has been working with a national strategic plan on HIV and AIDS, and that was our target for Rwanda in particular. We worked with our partners, RAMREC, and I'm glad I can see the faces here. We worked with RAMREC to advocate for that language to be included in the national strategic plan. So, and we couldn't do it alone. RAMREC couldn't stand alone and say, we want to do this. So one of the strategies we did was to partner with other NGOs or civil society to advocate for this. And as I speak now, that language has been included in the national strategic plan, and all kudos to the Rwandan government. We thank them for that. The other country would be Kenya, and our policy goal really was to the matrimonial law, or it was the bill then. The challenges were inheritance for women, and we were trying to push that a woman can inherit her husband's property, and the men were saying, no, if she didn't come with anything, or if it's me who's earned the money, there was that disparity. And we worked with our partners there, again with the civil society in Kenya, to make sure that that law was favorable for women. It was because the challenge we have is that men are the biggest leaders, I would say. They hold the power. And if you look at the parliaments, apart from Rwanda again, the majority are men. So whatever law was put forward, the men tried to push their agenda. And this is what our partners were trying to do, engaging the men to push the women's agenda in those policies. So again, as we speak right now, the matrimonial bill, now the law, was passed, and the policy we're trying to push for, which is the inheritance clause, has been passed, and the women have a good, not very good, but it's good for us. It was a good war for us. If you look at Sierra Leone, that was the biggest, I think, challenge for us in this process. One is because they are post-conflict, and the laws are, they're still colonial, if I can say that. They haven't had much work on the laws in terms of bringing them up to date, like the other 2 countries. So most of it was trying to then work on revising those policies. How can we bring them up to date, but then also include language around involving men and boys in those policies? We haven't had much luck, I must report. One is because there's a lot of bureaucracy. That's one of the biggest challenges we're finding. Getting into the parliamentary system or getting, advocating politically has been a challenge for us so far, and we're still trying to work with our partners there. And the current crisis is not helping much. So, we'll keep working on that part. Strategies we've been using in achieving this, we did a lot of political mapping, and basically we identified who our partners were, who are on the fence, who are the fence sitters, and then who was opposed. And then media was very important. Kenya has used a lot of media. I think they're the best example in terms of media advocacy. They used a lot of media in trying to get their agenda forward. Rwanda, we didn't have much problem, like I said. The government is very accepting, so that wasn't a big challenge for us. And then Sierra Leone is more of the community mobilization that we're trying to use to push the agenda upwards. So we are working more in the communities, dialoguing with the traditional leaders, because they're very strong there. So that's where we're coming from, moving upwards. In terms of the challenges, it's the political environment, obviously. They're not very willing. The willingness is not there. Some countries have the laws, but implementing them is the issue. So the political environment is not very willing, it's not very helpful. Again, apart from Rwanda, I keep coming back there. Resources, obviously, because we're working within project resources and they have a limit and a timeline. So that's a challenge, because you get to a point, we've already done the scans, we have the policy reports, but then what happens after that? Because it's a 3-year project. What happens after the project ends? And the solution here is we're trying to engage governments to invest in this. This should be something they own. But like I said, they're not buying in, so it's already pulling us behind. Hopefully we'll move there. And then another challenge, another strategy we used was the regional economic committees, the SADC, the East African community. Those are very helpful in trying to push downwards to the countries. For example, if they've ratified some of the UN policies, so these RECs then help us to come and put pressure on the governments. The challenge with the RECs is that they're very bureaucratic. I think we've tried chasing African Union for the last, I'm not sure, probably 4 years or 5 years, to just get them to read one policy and say, yes, we've approved, or no, or we change this. So that bureaucracy is one of the challenges we're finding. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, can everyone hear me in the back as well? No? Raise your hand if you can hear me. Good, thanks. I'll just talk a little bit about the work that we've done from Save the Children. As I said, I'm based out of Sweden. A little bit about our work that we've done relating to the post-2015 agenda and why. As I mentioned before, child protection is very much at the core and heart of what we do as Save the Children, especially when we link it to violence and GBV. So that one became quite obvious for us to have as one of the favored themes when we tried to influence the post-2015 agenda. We looked at it from sort of 2 angles as well. Obviously, we wanted to affect the MDG that deals with children, but we also wanted to look at the one that deals with gender. Quite early on, I was asked, but we already have an MDG on gender, promoting gender equality and empowering women, and then possibly in girls. Aren't you happy with that? And the answer that came out of the organization was that, no, we're not really happy with that. As Joni was saying, the language in this document will very much lead the development agenda for years to come. So the rhetoric and the language is key, because that's where donors, that's where governments are going to put their emphasis and efforts into. I'm not saying that if it's not there that they won't fund it, that they won't prioritize it. Sure they will. But the major part of funds and political will be geared towards the 2015 agenda. So the language, the rhetoric needs to be there. The rhetoric influences policies. Policies influences programming focuses and funds. Program focus and funds influences what reports will we write, what will they be about. It also influences statistics. What kind of statistics should we have and about what? It also influences what kind of research should we do on what topics, once again. And it also influences what should be the focus on our projects and the programs that we work with in the countries. So don't ever underestimate the rhetoric and the language and importance of that, because we surely don't. And we want the boys and men to be part of not only the gender MDG, but also the children MDG. Now, I have the privilege of working in a country that I would say very good at embracing equality work and gender work. That doesn't mean that everything is perfect. We still have a lot of things to do, both as Sweden and both in terms of what work we support internationally and globally as well. Sweden has had now for a number of years been a champion when it comes to gender and equality. It's actually one of the 3 development focus areas is on gender equality in women. But what has that meant in reality? And this is my stance and others as well, and there might be others who disagree with me, and that's fine. That has meant focus on women and girls, which has really been visible in the reports and the funding. Now, Sweden has been good in funding projects such as Men Engage and other initiatives, but you look at where has the focus been. And I look at it from a GBV focus once again. The focus and being a champion for women and girls has been good in terms of some aspects of health and access to education, for example. But we are not cracking the solution to GBV. The numbers of abused women, girls, boys and men, because men are unfortunately both perpetrators and victims as well. We're not cracking that one. And that means we have to engage the boys and men in order to do that. And it's not, and I have to say this, I have to be very clear on this, because I get some criticism sometimes. It's not about shifting the focus. It's about broadening the focus. Broadening. That's very different from shifting it. Okay. So that's what we've been trying to do, different levels. First off, obviously, as Save the Children in Sweden, with the government, once again trying to influence and broadening the rhetoric and the language of gender and equality. We also work on a European level, trying to influence the EU as an institution, but also its member states. And the same thing with the UN as well. We're trying to go to the agencies and the bodies, trying to have a dialogue with them. But also, once again, the EU, just like the UN, is made up of member states. It's the member states who draws up the policies and the decisions. It's not the NGOs. Sure, we're invited to discuss. We do work with them. We do reports with them. But we are not decision makers. So that's why we focus very much on the states. And I would encourage you as well, that's why we need you so badly. Because sometimes we sit and we drop these policy lines and advocate calls, and they're big calls. And country officers, they don't really know and find their way. Where do we play a role? But when it comes to these initiatives, like the MDG, for example, national initiatives plays a major, major role. Because it is your governments who are telling the EU and the UN what will be the focus area. Sure, there are some countries. Sweden, for example, is the 4th biggest bilateral development donor. Karina can correct me if I'm wrong on that one. There are some countries who are bigger players who will have a bigger say in affecting the agenda, obviously. But we need the support from all the countries. So that's part of the mapping that we did as well, to sort of look at what countries should we really target? What countries can really influence more so that agenda that sets the priorities for MG post 2015? And I think that's also an exercise we're going to do next, right?
Thank you. Thank you both, Mabel and Hendrik, very much. I think we want to take about 5 minutes just for some questions from the floor, and then we also have some questions to you.
My question to you and I think to all of you and for the college also, I'm not sure about the issue because, see, this is this country. Confusion is, I need a solution. This is the place where we can get a solution. If we talk about the gender science, we talk about the women gap. Because while we talk about the gender-based violence, I'm not seeing anywhere that transgenders are being covered in the class. Or in the world, or even in the community group, what this is like by the people, or especially whatever it is. Because I know that we should be studying the people who have done I was the other day, that the first version marriage transgender, men born transgender marriage to them. And they are more vulnerable because there are lots of individuals with transgender, it's definitely very good. But the first thing is that there is a place of the transgender. As Peter alluded that there is a gap that the transgender involvement a lot in education, in presentation. Yes, I do agree with this. But how we, if there is a gap, there is a solution how to fill it. Is this any solution or solution how you're willing to fill it? The last but not least, is it possible that this kind of thing which is done in Uganda, Kenya, and other neighbors, is it any scope that this type of activity project can be able to implement in India with a transgender group? Because we are globally first transgender group in globally that we came out and we talked about the men engaged at Kolkata Restaurant. And we are very shocked. We are working with women also, we are working with men, and we are working with trans. So mainstreaming is a strategy for our own group, that we also mainstream our community as gender, as whole gender. So is it any scope that we can be able to be a part of this campaign or the project? And if it is, then how?
Thank you very much. I would like to respond to that just briefly, and then I think Mabel, the question was also to you. I think it's a really good point. Are we advocating for stopping violence against women or gender-based violence, and basically violence against anyone based on gender? I can say that at the global level there's really strong advocacy for keeping always the concept of gender in, so that is definitely there. There's also the ask for basically saying we have to stop violence against anyone, and then say an indicator has to be who is the discriminated group. So at country level, it can very well be that the country looks at, okay, who are the discriminated groups or the groups who are disproportionately suffering this violence in our country, and then country level interventions or regional level interventions can definitely be made. So that's why it's so important to us that it's called gender-based violence, not only women-based violence, or violence against women. So there's also a lot of advocacy going on for acceptance of language, and as Henrik mentioned, language is so incredibly important, on recognizing sexual orientation and gender identities, so people of different sexual orientations and gender identities. This is a really, really tough nut to crack, we are finding. So the advocacy is definitely there, but there's quite a lot of conservative countries who are not opening their doors to accepting this language. And I think, Mabel, you may have experience with that in the African context, which is very, very, like, the country positions are very, very different. I think the last thing I want to add is that what we are asking for as Men Engage is for a target on engaging men and boys in stopping this violence. So recognizing that it's unfortunately men and boys committing a large percentage of any of this kind of violence, and that's why we want to have them involved in preventing it. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much. And my part is the African context. So to give you a background, the policy scans I spoke about that we did were done in 11 African countries. And we developed a scorecard on how African countries score, and LGBTI was one of the elements. And of the 11, I think only South Africa got a good score, and it's because of the laws that they have. All the other African countries do not have any laws in terms of protecting or even accepting the LGBTI, which the transgender falls in. And South Africa got a yellow because we're scoring on green, which is very good, yellow, which is average, and then red. So while the rest got red, South Africa got yellow, meaning that they have the laws, but even on the ground, implementation is really terrible. And we've had a lot of homophobia in South Africa. There's hate crimes on, the LGBTI community. So that's the challenge so far for us. The environment is not accepting. The community, the government, it's very difficult. So I think for us, our way forward is advocating from the outside. Using the donors. We have quite a lot of funders here. Cut the funding. I mean, put what can I call them? Caveats on the funding. And that's what helped in the case of Uganda. The law was passed, and the donors started to pull out and said, we're not giving funding if you are restrictive. And I think we've all heard that law was revoked now. The government said, it was something to do with, what did they call it? There was no quorum, but the truth is it was the pressure on the funding. And even now they can't accept to say, let's get the quorum and pass this law because they're scared that the funding then will go away. So the trick to go around this is to hold back, the donors to put caveats or hold back funding so that then the government can respond. In terms of replication, like you're asking, can it be done in India? Our mandate as Sonke and Men Engage Africa is within the African region. But what we can do then is share our experiences, our reports, which you can then use as evidence when requesting for funds from donors. So I'm happy to take your contact and share those with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mabel, for a very concrete example from practice. I'll take one more question. The sir in the back.
Thank you. My name is Desmond from Kenya. I'm coming from Africa for on this continent. But I'm glad that the UN, especially the SDG, has taken up the gender issue as a standalone. And I'm glad that you are developing indicators for monitoring and evaluation. My plea is we must get our indicators correct. Otherwise, and we get correct early enough so that we know that what we are monitoring and what the results that we expect to get. Otherwise, if we don't get the indicators correct in the beginning, I remember some years back we were trying to develop indicators for FGM and we didn't know exactly what to look for, because what is healthy aspect of this and that, and what are the factors that you can capture easily without any resistance. Of course, it's one of the major side effects, one of the major means of gender injustice when we cut 100 million women in Africa. So my plea is, let's try to develop our indicators and get them correct from the word go, so that by the end of 2030, we will have had a proper or reasonable progress that we can report on.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we can generally agree that this
is incredibly important, stopping female genital mutilation. And I know that there is a lot of advocacy work done on exactly recognizing that language. And if I'm not mistaken, it is actually already in the proposed framework at the moment. So yeah, I will take one more question since you had a plea and not actually a question. So, but thank you.
I think I read somewhere that there is a call for action, also not in real there was a call for action.
Yes.
And there will be a call for action in building 2.
Yeah.
When reading the workshop title, I was thinking, oh, okay, here leaders of the world. That's now a place where we discuss this call for action. So the first question, is there a call for action?
Yes.
The second question, where is the opportunity to discuss that?
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay, yes, there is a call
To action, and it's being drafted at the moment. And a lot of the things that we've put here, so a lot of the post-2015 related positions, like on sexual and reproductive health and rights, GBV, and care work, it's going to be in there. There is also a banner up when you walk into the venue here. There's a banner up to say, what is your plea? So what's your pledge, sorry. So people can actually write their pledge on there, and we are going to make that feed into the call to action. That will be read out loud on Thursday at the closing plenary. The place where you can actually sit down and co-write, and we do call on you to do that because it's a lot of work writing these things, so that would be great, is, so we're meeting at 1 o'clock at the place where currently the booths are, so the different organizations presenting themselves. I am seeing someone flagging me, thank you. Lakshman, please tell us where we are going to meet.
We were meeting there yesterday, but now it has been occupied by the booth.
Yes.
So we are getting another place where, but we'll get back to you with the proper information. Where is it? Because we haven't yet heard back.
Okay, so I will be approachable here at the end. I will just hang around for a while until I get informed where the place actually is. So, yeah, thank you. Sorry, yes. Now we actually have a question to you because like it has been mentioned before, but the asks that you actually have and the work that you're doing, it's important for those doing the national level, the regional level, and the global level, the advocacy work, to know, what is important to you and to translate that at global level. So Henrik is going to have some tricking questions for you.
I do advocacy training within Save the Children, and I meet a lot of my colleagues from the field, and actually I go and visit them, and they tell me, okay, so you do advocacy, yeah. So you're basically a car salesman. That's what they think of me. And that's okay, I've been called worse, so it's okay. And I try to tell them, well, I'm here for you. I mean, your concerns are my concerns. I mean, what you're doing in the field, your evidence, your issues, I take that and bring that up to a different level. So you have to tell me what you want to do. And they tell me, well, no, we don't believe in that. And I ask them, well, what do you mean? Well, when you have a call for something, for the MDG, you call for world peace. And that doesn't work for us. And I asked them, so what do you want then? Well, for me in Uganda, would love to have on the curricula, school curricula, a class on preventing violence amongst children. And I said, well, we're not that far off, because conflict prevention, peace, we're on the same line here, but you have to tell me these things. So what we wanted to have an element of interaction within this workshop, and that's where you come into play. And we thought it would only be men engaged organizations and people, but I see a lot of other people, which is going to make it interesting. So we just want to see the 3 forums, or the 3 themes that we've chosen from Men Engage as our priority areas. How far away are we from each other? So you're going to help us, and by raising your hand, telling us what are your main priorities in the countries that you work in. What are your main concerns? And then we'll have, and then we'll do a little matchmaking with our themes and your concerns. Because that will also help us to see if we're on the right track, if we have to adjust something as well. Because when it comes down to, whenever we do advocacy, it needs to come from the ground. It needs to be rooted in real issues and real problems. So that we're trying to get at here as well. And then we have a few more questions for you, so we'll take that later. Yeah, so we have these four. Well, gender is the overarching theme, and then we have three other areas, which is GBV, SR, HR, and care. But if you have something different, please call it out.
And gender-based violence and sexual and reproductive health and rights. That's what the abbreviations stand for.
My name is Sheikh Quraish. I'm from eastern part of India, Organization Committee for Legal Aid to Poor. So whenever any problem arises on this issue, we used to try to solve in the community level, from the panchayat committee level. Then we advocate for policy framing and law, for making law, and also for some problem we go to High Court in a PIL, public interest litigation. This is our solution for any problem arises in this regard.
If you can be very specific to a concern, an issue that you're working with.
Like Domestic Violence Act and
That's one?
PCPLDT, diverse abortion, sex selection and abortion. Sex selection and abortion, it is very,
Yeah.
because girl children are, after abortion, they make abortion compulsory.
If you can give us one specific, your main concern that we gave.
Entitlement and harassment at workplace, women, sexual harassment at workplace.
Dr. Nida Shiva, and involved in gender issues as well as public health concerns. I would like special attention to acid attacks. They're totally gender based, always on the face, and the management of that requires medical people, and most people don't realize that the skin, you to take out from other part of your body to, the skin transplants and all. It's too costly, too gruesome, and this needs special attention. And another bit, if you can include, is stopping what we call in Hindi, Ma Behan Ki Gali, the abuses which are for mothers and sisters by men. I don't know if I made it clear, because all the horrible, abuses which are, which many of the men use. And this was a theatre person who had, when we were dealing with sex-selective abortion issues, the inverse sex ratio getting worse in Punjab. He was a theatre person, human rights person from Punjab, who said, the first bit you have to change is stopping boys and men from, this verbal violence by using the, I don't know what abuses you have, but in Hindi we have horrible ones, and people just use them very frivolously, not realizing what the implications are, because there's desensitization in the mind, you must be having in different language, and you're putting it down. And then when I was working, we had posters related to that it actually reflects your upbringing, and it's by saying that, by these verbal abuses, please do not insult your own parents, so you have to put it in a way which is acceptable. But these two I would specifically like to mention.
Thank you.
It would be great if we can get people from other continents as well to see. That would be interesting to get some from the Americas, Africa, Mexico. Bienvenido. Adelante.
I'll come to you. Just one minute, sorry, because the mister in the back has the microphone. He will speak, and then you will get the mic.
Hi. Hello, Chuck Derry from Gender Violence Institute in Minnesota, in the USA, and also at the North American Men Engaged Network. And